the first thing if any of you have visited the Probable Futures website, you probably know at this point that brevity is not generally our thing. But I was able to actually get this down to a manageable amount of time. And I'll do my best to kind of tie this theme together tonight, starting out by saying, I started out as a musician. I grew up as a vocalist and as a musical theater nerd, and I went to school for music and theater in Miami, Florida. You know, it might not come as a surprise that I'm not a scientist. I'm not a geospatial expert. I'm a person who spent most of her career in the arts. So my education in music and theater led to working in that space and ultimately to working in museums. And then I had the opportunity to work with climate scientists and other kinds of thought leaders in the climate science space during my time at the Woodwell Climate Research Center, which is an independent climate research organization. So I worked there before I left to help Probable Futures founder Spencer Glendon launch this initiative. And the goal of Probable Futures might actually explain why I'm leading it. And it's with the Probable Futures platform, we're looking to build a bridge between climate science and culture. So we really saw in launching Probable Futures, we saw the need for a global utility, for a resource where anyone could go and access what we actually know about the future, what climate models and what climate science tells us about the future. And we saw that there was a need for this for very practical things like civic planning or corporate risk management. But we also saw the opportunity to use what climate models could tell us to inform our imaginations, to form imaginative storytelling, to inform art and music, really to help all of us envision what the future might look like in a warming world, but to envision a future that was actually based in what we know about the future. And that's because the stories that we have been getting about climate change, even in the government space and in storytelling, is usually portrayed in one of two ways. One is, with more kind of modernist architecture and with some electric cars where nothing much else changes. And two is kind of distant apocalypse. Neither one of these things are really the future really lies in between those two things. And so we created Probable Futures to help populate what those futures in between might actually look like. So climate science, building a bridge from climate science to culture, how are we actually doing that? How are we showing up to do this? And it is to democratize climate knowledge, democratize access to climate model data and put it in the hands of people and give them tools and frameworks to effectively use it, to develop a kind of climate literacy that we're frankly all going to need to live through a changing world, and bring something that we call climate awareness into our everyday lives. So when we first launched Probable Futures, we decided to limit the climate model data, the content, to really the most fundamental first order and near-term impacts of climate change, which are heat, drought, and precipitation. And to make a resource that would have a global scope to it, but would also be at a resolution that was useful to people. So at the time, the more that we explored the science with our colleagues at Woodwell, who are our science partners, the more that we found that orienting climate models for use by the public in this way was a little bit harder than we thought. So I don't know how familiar people on this call are with climate models, but they generally fall into two categories. One, general circulation models, or GCMs, which are often referred to as global climate models, and then regional climate models, which is exactly what it sounds like. They're more granular, higher resolution models, but that come that are not global. And so at the time, GCMs provided the global coverage, but they were really too coarse to be useful. And in some cases, so coarse that they would give kind of inaccurate information for places because the grid cells are so big. And in some places, they might straddle, say, a coast and land. And regional climate models had the high resolution that we were looking for, but weren't standardized across regions. They were kind of, these regional climate models became kind of apples and oranges, and different research groups would develop them, but they couldn't really be put together. But then we hit actually a stroke of luck when we first were embarking upon this initiative. So about 2 years ago, something called the Cortex Core experiment was released. And this essentially is a scientific initiative that standardizes these regional climate models. And so for the first time, people were able to actually mosaic these regional climate models together to make a high resolution global product. And that's exactly what we did. So what we developed was a global product that has a 22-kilometer resolution. And as far as we know, no one else has done this yet, but certainly no one else has done it and published it as a usable tool geared towards the general public in the way that we have. So we use Mapbox to build the maps, the interactive maps that we have on the site. And if you haven't been there, check it out and you'll see more of what I mean. And their team was extraordinarily helpful. And it frankly was one of the instances that made me realize how few people, even in the geospatial community, are actually working with data from climate models, and how the file formats are completely foreign. I mean, my colleague from Postlight, our software engineer, is on this call. And I remember one of the first times I sent one of the files over to Postlight, and they were kind of like, what is this? And I just did not expect that at all. I expected that kind of everybody would know how to work with it, but that's really not the case. So the Mapbox team had to change actually some of their backend infrastructure in the Mapbox tiling service in order to accommodate the size of the tiles that we were working with. So if you've benefited from that increase in the Mapbox tiling service, you're welcome. So we worked really closely, of course, with climate scientists, but also with software strategists, designers, did a lot of testing and interviews with potential users to make sure that we were making it really accessible to non-experts, people who wouldn't know how to make a map from scratch. And we also worked really hard to make it beautiful and appealing. A lot of this is really stark, bad information, frankly. And, one of the kind of feelings that we're trying to get across is it's pretty amazing and wondrous that we're even able to do this, that we're able to know as much as we are about the future and about this world. And so we should deliver it in a way that kind of honors and respects that beauty and that wonder. So with the platform and the interactive maps, we really encourage people throughout the platform to view the climate data through the lens of their own community. So what we're looking at here is a map, it's just a snapshot of a map of days above 90 degrees. So for this particular location, which is right outside of Bogota, what does an additional 100 days above 90 degrees per year even mean for this region? I don't know. Is their infrastructure prepared for it? Is their emergency response system prepared for it? What about their industry and their food systems? Really only that community is going to know if they're prepared and know how they can mitigate the worst impacts. And so that's why we're equipping them with these tools and making just kind of the most fundamental information available so that they can see it through their own perspectives. And so we encourage that imagination throughout the platform, but we also kind of help get the gears turning with these little stories and illustrations that are sourced from pieces in the media that we put throughout the maps, to start to give a sense of, you know, how some of the invisible aspects of our civilization are exposed to climate risks. And we ask people to contribute to those as well. We think of this as that we're making a power tool available to the public. So climate models are incredibly powerful things. They're huge data sets. It's a lot of information, and power tools need users' manuals. So we created a guide, again, geared toward kind of the average informed person that would help users understand how climate models work, what their strengths are, and what their limitations are. And we really found that with this, there's been more of a desire, more of a demand for climate data recently, which is one of the reasons that we did this. But there's not a lot of education out there about the climate models themselves. So we really saw a need for that area and are getting some good feedback about that. So we're launching in phases. The public site is available now with the heat maps. We're launching our water volume and our precipitation maps within just a couple of weeks, and then drought will follow sometime this summer. But in parallel, we've been building a tool that allows users to take the maps further and build their own maps with meaningful information to them. And we call this PF Professional. Right now, we're in the alpha testing phase of this, and I can already tell this group would probably have really interesting data sets to layer on top of PF Professional, and that's exactly what this tool does. So again, we use Mapbox as the as the backend infrastructure, and then you can probably some of you will probably recognize the Kepler software. So we put Kepler on top of it and created a way for the average user to be able to upload their own data set and put it on top of climate data. And this allows the user to just start to explore the connections between, the human-built world that we live in and the physical climate. And again, we made it really accessible to the average person. So if you have a CSV with any kind of geographical location, lat long or zip code or anything, then you can use PF Pro. And I'll give a little demo here, a mock demo here. So I'm bringing in the WRI data set of global power plants and bringing it on and putting it on top of the days above 90 degrees map here. Right now, we're only doing point data, but we're working towards getting shape files on top of this. And then you can start to work with the data set to tell stories on top of the map. So you can start to filter and, just show me coal power plants, or color code the fuel type for the power plant, or, make the radius the size relative to the capacity of the power plant. And really just gives the users the ability to start to zero in on potential risk areas. It's almost like a screening tool. And we think of it as an ideating tool and a question asking tool more than an answer giving tool. So you can use these maps and different types of data sets to just explore what might happen. We've had conversations with actually very large music production companies who have, music venues and that sort of thing. So we've, mapped on here music venues and stadiums to see, how can we use our imaginations to think about how the live music scene might change in the future? Because when the physical climate is changing, the rest of civilization is going to change. And the more prepared we are for it, the better we'll be able to adapt and mitigate. The other thing I wanted to add is that you can download the data that you initially uploaded here into Probable Futures Pro. So the the WRI data set, I could pull that back out and it'll now be enriched with the climate data. So then you could bring it into a different environment like Tableau or something and analyze it or create other infographics from there. So I'll conclude just by saying Probable Futures is not a business. None of our tools are for profit. We're deploying philanthropy to make all of this accessible and possible, just to help people be able to tell more customized climate stories and to be able to make a case at work or at home or in their communities to prepare for climate change and take action to avoid the worst effects of it. So happy to share it with you today and really happy to connect with you all.